In 1960, this was one of the poorest countries on Earth. Its people earned, on average, around $80 a year, a figure that placed it below much of Africa. It had almost no oil, no coal worth mining, barely enough flat land to feed itself. And it had just been cut in half by a war that killed millions and ended without ending. No treaty, only a ceasefire and a line drawn across the middle of a peninsula. A generation before that, it had lost something stranger. For 35 years, it had not been allowed to be a country at all. Its name was struck from the maps. Its language was pushed out of its own schools. Its people were ordered, by law, to take new names in a language that was not theirs. Today, that same country sits among the most culturally powerful nations on the planet. Its films win the highest awards in cinema. Its music fills stadiums on 6 continents. Children in places it has never traded with learn to read its alphabet from their phones. In 2024, it sold $9.85 billion worth of culture alone. Music, film, television, games. A figure that barely existed 30 years ago. Both of these things are true at the same time. A nation that, within living memory, had its land taken, its name erased, and its language outlawed, is now one of the places the rest of the world most wants to imitate. It did not win that back with territory. It has no more land than it did. The border still cuts the peninsula in 2. It won it with everything that could not be confiscated. There is a reason this is the only country on Earth that gives its alphabet a national holiday. There is a reason the thing the world now consumes is older than any of the screens it arrives on. How does a place that lost almost everything end up exporting the one thing no one could take from it? This is South Korea. A peninsula the size of a small country hanging off the edge of the Asian mainland, pointed south toward the sea. Roughly 70% of it is mountains. The ranges run down the eastern side like a spine, and the rivers run west, and the people gathered where the rivers widened into plains. 51 million of them live here now, more than half in a single sprawl around the capital. It is a hard place to hold and a harder place to leave. To the west is China. To the east, across a narrow strait, is Japan. To the north, beyond the line, is the other Korea. For most of recorded history, this peninsula has been the small thing between large things, and most of its story is the story of staying itself anyway. To understand any of it, you begin in Seoul. There is a palace at the heart of the city called Gyeongbokgung, the Palace of Shining Happiness. It was the seat of the kings of the Joseon dynasty, who ruled this peninsula for 5 centuries, and at its height, it was a city within a city, hundreds of buildings behind a long stone wall, with a throne hall facing a wide stone courtyard and a mountain rising directly behind it. In 1910, Japan annexed Korea, and one of the first things the new rulers did was go to work on this palace. They tore down most of it. By some counts, 90% of the buildings were dismantled and sold or destroyed. Then, in the open space they had cleared, Directly in front of the throne hall, blocking it from the city, they built an enormous Western-style stone building to house the colonial government. The palace did not just lose its buildings, it lost its line of sight. From the main street, you could no longer see the seat of the Korean kings. You saw the office of the people who had taken the country. This was not an accident of construction, it was the method. Across 35 years, the occupation worked to make Korea forget it had ever been Korea. Korean history was cut from the schools, Korean newspapers were closed, tens of thousands of old documents were gathered up and destroyed. And in 1939 came an order that reached into every household at once. Koreans were to abandon their family names and register new ones in the Japanese style. The names that had passed down for centuries, the lineages people could recite back 20 generations, were to be replaced with a stroke of a pen. A country can survive losing a war. This was something else. This was an attempt to erase the idea of the country while keeping the people, to keep the hands and lose the name. Remember the building in front of the palace. Remember the names taken off the registers. We will come back to what it costs to put a thing like that back. For now, walk north of the palace into the lanes of Bukchon. Here, the old houses still stand. The hanok, low and tiled, their roofs curving up at the corners, their rooms arranged around small courtyards open to the sky. They were built to be warm in a brutal winter, heated from beneath the floor by a system of stone flues that carried the warmth of a single kitchen fire under the whole house. People still live in them. Tourists thread through the lanes by the thousand, and behind the doors, ordinary families go on heating their floors the way their grandparents did. And then you come out of the lanes and the city changes completely. South of the river is Gangnam, a name half the planet can now sing. 40 years ago, it was farmland and gravel flats. Today, it is glass and steel as far as the eye can follow, towers full of law firms and plastic surgeons, and the offices of companies whose products are probably within arm's reach of you right now. The subway underneath it is one of the busiest in the world, and it is spotless, and it runs on time, and there is a screen on the platform telling you exactly how many minutes until the next train. The river that gave the miracle its name runs straight through the middle of all this. The Han is wide here, wider than seems possible for a city to have grown across, and at night, the bridges over it light up one by one. The whole capital was built and rebuilt along its banks, flattened almost entirely in the war, then thrown back up so fast that the city you see is essentially younger than the people running it. And the rebuilding did not only go up. In the heart of the old city, there was once a stream called Cheonggyecheon. During the Hungry Decades, it was paved over, then buried under an elevated highway. Progress poured in concrete over the water. Then, in the early 2000s, the city did something almost no city does. It tore the highway down and dug the stream back out. Today, Cheonggyecheon runs clear through the center of Seoul again, and office workers eat their lunch beside water the country had once decided it could not afford to keep. It is a small thing, but it is the same instinct again, going back for what was lost. Stand in Gangnam, and it is almost impossible to believe the $80 figure. That a city this seamless came out of a country that poor, this fast, is the first great riddle of modern Korea. And the answer to it is not a happy one. To find it, you leave the capital and go south to the coast, where the country built its way out of the ashes. On the southeastern shore, sits the city of Ulsan. A lifetime ago, it was a fishing town. Today, it builds some of the largest machines human beings have ever made. The shipyard here is among the biggest on the planet. A coastline of dry docks where vessels longer than skyscrapers are assembled like watches, plate by plate. Down the coast at Pohang, furnaces that did not exist in 1960 pour steel for half of Asia. Inland, the factories turn out cars and screens and the silicon that the rest of the world runs on. None of this grew on its own. It was willed into being, and the man who willed it took the country by force. In 1961, an army general named Park Chung-hee seized power in a coup. He would rule for 18 years, most of that time as a dictator, and he made a wager that would define the country, that a nation with no resources could manufacture its way to wealth if it poured everything into a handful of family-run conglomerates and pointed them at the export market. These conglomerates have a name now known everywhere: the Chaebol, Samsung, Hyundai, LG. The state handed them cheap loans and protection from competition, and in return, it set them brutal targets. Make more, sell it abroad, earn the foreign money the country needs to survive. The stories from those years sound invented. The founder of Hyundai, a man named Chung Ju-young, who had grown up a poor farmer's son and once walked off the family land with nothing, decided in the early 1970s that Korea would build ships. Before he had a shipyard, before he had a single order. The story goes that he went to a foreign bank for a loan, was refused, and pulled out a Korean banknote printed with an image of a 16th century armored warship. Proof, he argued, that Koreans had been building ironclad vessels 300 years before anyone else. He got the loan. He built the dry dock and the first ships at the same time, on the same empty stretch of beach. And underneath the factories was the real engine, the one thing the country could mass produce from the start. Children sent to school. Korea poured everything it had into education. A population that had been kept from reading for centuries became, within a single generation, one of the most thoroughly schooled on earth. The literacy a king had tried to hand the poor in the 1400s finally arrived in full. A country with no oil discovered it was sitting on the only resource that compounds: people who could read, calculate, and build. It worked, in the narrow sense that it was meant to. For 3 decades, the economy grew at nearly 10% a year. A country that imported almost everything began to export almost everything. They called it the miracle on the Han River, after the river that runs through Seoul. But the miracle was built on the backs of people who were not allowed to share in it. The factory hours were inhuman, wages were held down on purpose. Workers who organized were jailed, and sometimes worse. Park ruled by curfew and censorship. There were laws about how long your hair could be, about what music could be played. In 1979, his own intelligence chief shot him dead at a private dinner. The man who built the modern economy did not live to see what it became. Hold that contradiction for a moment, because it runs through everything that follows. The same state that censored the music is the ancestor of the country that now sells music to the world. The same hands that were held to the factory line built the wealth that paid for the cameras and the studios. The empire of culture that is coming was poured first in steel. And it was poured on top of something far older, a history the occupation tried to bury and could not reach the bottom of. Go to Gyeongju in the southeast, and you are standing in the capital of a kingdom that ruled this peninsula 1,000 years before any of this. They call Jeju the museum without walls because the past is simply lying in the open here, grass-covered royal tombs rising out of the city like green hills, an ancient observatory that has watched the sky for 13 centuries, the foundations of palaces in the fields. In the year 688, the kingdom of Silla unifies most of the peninsula for the first time. For nearly 1,000 years it holds. Its craftsmen cast a bronze bell so large and so pure that its tone is said to carry for miles, and its monks carve into the granite of a mountain above the sea a temple and a single seated Buddha facing the dawn, Seokguram. The figure is positioned so precisely that on the right morning, the first light off the East Sea touches its face. The temple below it, Bulguksa, still stands. It has burned and been rebuilt more than once. The occupation was not the first force to come for it, and the monks still climb the same stone stairs. When you stand in front of that Buddha, you are looking at the same expression people came to look at 1,300 years ago. The kingdoms that built it are gone. The face is not. Down in the valley, the kingdom left other proofs of itself. The observatory called Cheomseongdae still stands, a bottle-shaped tower of fitted granite raised in the 7th century to watch the heavens, one of the oldest surviving observatories anywhere on Earth. And the great bronze bell they cast carries a legend the country has never quite let go of. To give it its flawless tone, the story says, a child was offered to the molten metal, and ever since, when the bell is struck, people swear they hear in its long dying note a sound like a child crying out for its mother. Whether it happened or not, they still hear it that way. The kingdom understood something this country has never forgotten. The things you make to outlast you are the things worth dying over. The mountains that shelter places like this hold their own survivors. High on the eastern cliffs, where almost nothing can follow, lives an animal that has barely changed since the last ice age. The long-tailed goral is a kind of wild goat, brownish-gray, sure-footed on ledges that would kill a person. It is so old as a species and so unchanged that scientists call it a living fossil. There are only a few hundred left on these slopes. They survive precisely because the terrain is useless to everyone else. Too steep to farm, too sheer to build on. The goral lives where the country cannot, and so the country has not taken it. Back down in the valleys, in a bend of a river in the southeast, there is a village that has kept a different kind of old thing alive. Hallyu is a village in Andong, and it has been lived in by the same families for some 600 years. The houses here are hanok, like the ones in Seoul, but Hallyu was never rebuilt for tourists. It simply was never abandoned. The families that founded it are still here, and here, more than almost anywhere, you find the thing the occupation most wanted to dissolve and could not: the everyday architecture of Korean life. Korea was shaped for 5 centuries by Confucian thought, an idea of the world held together by respect, by your place in a line of ancestors and descendants, by ritual done correctly. In Hallyu, they still perform a mask dance that is older than most countries, the carved wooden faces, grotesque and grinning, used for centuries to let commoners mock the nobles for one night without consequence. Families across the country still perform the rites for their dead, Jesa, setting a table of food for grandparents and great-grandparents, bowing to an empty place at the head of it. The occupation called all of this backward. It pushed Shinto shrines onto the peninsula and ordered people to worship at them. It wanted Korea to become an extension of somewhere else. But ritual is hard to legislate out of a household. You can close a school. You cannot easily reach the table where a family bows to its grandmother. Much of what makes Korea, Korea survived not in monuments, which can be torn down, but in the small, repeated acts that happen behind doors. That is a pattern worth holding on to. These are only the places the stories settle on. The peninsula is dense with others. At Suwon, just south of the capital, a king built a great fortress wall in the 1790s, using lifting machines he helped design himself, and it still rings the old city. In the southwest, the green tea terraces of Bosong climb the hillsides in long, curved rows. In the northeast, the granite peaks of Soraksan turn gold and red each autumn and pull the whole country toward the mountains. And in nearly every town, there is a bathhouse, the Jimjilbang, where families spend entire evenings scrubbed and steamed and asleep on heated floors, a shared ritual of rest that has somehow survived into the age of the smartphone. The peninsula's deepest wound, though, is more recent, and it begins with a war that came down this very land. In 1950, the Army of the North crossed the line and drove south, and within weeks, it had taken almost the entire peninsula. Almost. At the bottom of the country, around the port city of Busan, the defenders dug in along a last shrinking perimeter, with their backs to the sea and nowhere left to go. If Busan had fallen, there would have been no South Korea at all. It did not fall. The line around it held long enough for the war to turn. The turn, when it came from the sea. In September of 1950, a daring amphibious landing far up the west coast at Incheon cut the invading army's supply lines in a single stroke and reversed the war almost overnight. Today, Incheon is where most visitors first touch the country. Its airport, built out on reclaimed tidal flats, is routinely judged one of the finest in the world. The shore where a war was turned is now the gateway through which the curious arrive. Busan today is the country's second city, a place of steep streets running down to the water, of the largest seafood market in the country, of a hillside neighborhood, Gamcheon, where refugees from that war built their homes in tight, bright rows up the slope. The city that was the country's last refuge became one of its great survivors. And it became something its wartime self could never have imagined. Every autumn, Busan hosts the largest film festival in Asia. Tens of thousands of people come to watch the work of a country that, 2 generations ago, was fighting for its life on these same streets. Because somewhere in those 2 generations, Korean cinema became one of the most admired in the world, and the man who put the final stamp on that has a name worth knowing. Bong Joon-ho is a director from the south of the country. In 2019, he made a film called Parasite, a sharp, funny, savage story about a poor family and a rich one, set entirely in modern Seoul. It was in Korean, it had no famous foreign stars, and in February of 2020, it won the Academy Award for Best Picture, the first film not in the English language ever to do so in nearly a century of the award. A story told in the language that had been banned from Korean schools 80 years earlier was named the best film in the world on a stage in Los Angeles. Keep Busan in mind. The city that refused to fall became the doorway through which the country's stories walked out to everyone else. And it was not only films. Once the dictatorship fell and the cameras and microphones were free, the stories came out all at once. In 1992, a group called Seo Taiji and Boys went on a Korean television talent show and performed something the judges did not understand. A fusion of rap and rock and dance that scored almost last with the panel and then went straight to the top of the charts anyway. It is usually marked as the night modern Korean pop was born. Within a decade, the industry had built a system around it. Years of training, choreography, songwriting, production, polished to a degree no one else was attempting. Performers like the singer known as Boa were sent out deliberately to win over the Japanese and Chinese markets first. It worked. Then it kept working on a scale no one predicted. A single Korean group, by some estimates, came to contribute billions of dollars a year to the national economy on its own. A Korean series about a deadly children's game became the most watched launch in the history of the world's largest streaming service. And here is the figure that surprises almost everyone. The country's single largest cultural export is not its music and not its film. It is video games, earning more on their own than music, movies, television, animation, and advertising combined. Add the beauty industry, the comics read on phones, the food, and the shape of it becomes clear. A country with no empire of land had built an empire out of the one territory still unclaimed: human attention. But not everything the country survived was a foreign army. Some of its hardest moments it did to itself, and the road out of them runs through two cities in the south. Off the southern coast lies Jeju, a volcanic island crowned by the highest mountain in the country, a dormant volcano whose crater holds a lake near the summit. Tourists know Jeju for its beaches and its mild winters, and its strange black lava coastline. Fewer know what happened here in 1948, in the years just after liberation, when an uprising on the island was put down with a savagery that killed tens of thousands of islanders, a wound the country could not even speak about openly for half a century. And yet, Jeju is also home to one of the most quietly astonishing traditions left in the world. Along its coast, the Hallyu go to work, the sea women. For generations, the divers of Jeju have been women, many of them now in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, who free dive without tanks, holding their breath, dropping 10 meters and more to gather shellfish and seaweed from the cold seabed. They surface with a long, whistling exhale that has its own name, and they have done this through colonial rule, through war, through the island's darkest year, and through the arrival of the modern world that should have made them obsolete. There are fewer of them every year now. The young do not take it up. When the last of these women surfaces for the last time, something will close that has been open for centuries. But that is not yet. For now, at dawn, on a cold island that has buried more than it can say, old women still walk into the sea and come back up breathing. Move inland and west, and you arrive at the country's table and at one of its quietest exports. In the city of Jeju, food is taken as seriously as anywhere on the peninsula, and the foundation of the Korean table is something that, described plainly, sounds unappealing: controlled rot. Korea is a country that learned, over centuries of hard winters, to preserve the harvest by fermentation. The result is jang, the deep, salty pastes of fermented soybean that flavor almost everything, and kimchi, the fermented vegetables, most famously cabbage, packed with chili and garlic and left to transform. There was a reason for it. The winters were long and the growing seasons short, and a family's survival could depend on what was buried in jars before the frost. Whole villages once gathered to make kimchi together in the late autumn, the kimjang, enough to last until spring. It was not a recipe, it was insurance against hunger. And now, it is on the shelves of supermarkets on the other side of the world. The same instinct that kept a poor country fed through winter became, without anyone planning it, one more thing the country sends out. A cuisine built on patience and scarcity, sold now to people who have never known either. Jeonju gave the country one of its signature dishes, bibimbap, a bowl of rice crowned with a wheel of vegetables and egg and red paste, mixed together at the table into something greater than its parts. In the mountain temples, Buddhist monks have spent centuries refining a cuisine with no meat, no garlic, no onion. Food meant to settle the mind rather than stir it, plated with the care of a religious act. And to go with all of it, there has always been soju, the clear grain spirit that is, by sheer volume, one of the best-selling liquors on the planet, though most of the world has still never heard its name. But to understand how the culture became something the country could send out at all, you have to understand how the country won the right to govern itself. Because the freedom to make and sell and say anything was not given. It was taken in the street at a terrible price. Park Chung-hee was dead, but the dictatorship did not die with him. Another general took his place, and in May of 1980, in the southern city of Gwangju, citizens rose up to demand democracy. The army was sent in. For 9 days, the people of Gwangju held their own city against their own soldiers. And when it was over, hundreds were dead. The true number is still argued over, and the government called them communists and rioters and buried the story.
It did not stay buried.
Through the 1980s, the pressure built. Students, workers, ordinary people in the streets, until in 1987, the dictatorship finally broke, and the country held a free election, and has held them since. Gwangju is remembered now not as a defeat, but as the place where the democracy was paid for. The country it made is young. It is younger than many of the people living in it. And then, almost in our own moment, it was tested again, in a single night. It is late on the 3rd of December, 2024. With no warning, the president goes on television and declares martial law. Soldiers move on the National Assembly. Helicopters land. For a few hours, the country holds its breath because everyone old enough remembers what martial law used to mean here. But this is not 1980. Lawmakers climb the walls of their own parliament to get inside past the soldiers. Ordinary people pour into the streets in the dark and stand in front of the troop carriers. And within hours, the assembly votes, almost unanimously, to strike the order down. The president backs off. Within weeks, he is impeached, and later removed, and later still convicted. The democracy that Gwangju paid for 40 years on held in a single night. It held because of something built long before the soldiers came, a habit of refusing to be erased that this country has practiced for a very long time. And that brings us to the strangest border on Earth. When the war stopped in 1953, the line where the armies happened to be standing became the line that has divided the peninsula ever since. On either side of it runs a strip of land about 4 kilometers wide and 250 kilometers long, the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. The name is almost a joke. It is one of the most heavily armed places on the planet, fenced and watched, and in many stretches sown with mines. Soldiers have died here in the decades since the war supposedly ended. Families were split by that line in 1953 and have not seen each other since. This is the lost land, made literal. A country cut in half, with the cut left open for 70 years. But here is what no one intended. For 70 years, almost no human being has set foot in most of that strip. The villages that were there are gone. The fields have grown over. And into that long, empty, accidental wilderness, the wildlife of the whole peninsula has quietly poured. The DMZ is now one of the richest natural habitats in East Asia. Thousands of species, dozens of them endangered, living in the one place people cannot go. Musk deer move through the reclaimed forest. Goats cling to the slopes. There are even credible reports of leopards and bears in the deep cover, in a strip of land that two armies face each other across. The reason is simple and a little bleak. Everywhere else on the peninsula, the land was farmed, dammed, paved, and built on through the fastest industrialization in modern history. The wetlands were drained. The forests were cut. Only this one strip, sealed off by fear, kept the full set of habitats a Korean ecosystem needs: marsh, grassland, river, and hill, intact and side by side. The animals did not choose the border, they simply ran out of anywhere else. And every winter, out of the cold north, come the cranes. The red-crowned crane is one of the rarest birds in the world. There are only around 3,000 of them left alive on the entire planet. They are tall, taller than a child, white-bodied with black wings and a single patch of bare red skin on the crown of the head. And across East Asia, they have meant the same thing for 1,000 years. Long life, faithfulness, the soul carried up at death. They mate for life. They dance, a real dance, bowing and leaping, that pairs perform together. And they spend their winters in the wetlands of the DMZ. The same fields that are too dangerous for people to enter are exactly safe enough for the rarest cranes on Earth. The birds feed in the rice stubble of the buffer zone and roost at night in the silence of the most militarized border in the world. The thing built to keep two peoples apart became the thing that keeps one of the planet's most fragile species alive. It is the country's whole story, written in a single image. Take everything away, leave the land empty and wounded, and life comes back into the wound, not in spite of the emptiness, but because of it. Which leaves the last question, the deepest one, the thing we have been circling since the beginning. If they lost the land, and lost the name, and lost the war, and lost even the right to govern themselves for most of a century, what exactly did the country send out into the world that the world now cannot get enough of? The answer is the oldest thing here. It is the language. And to understand why that is the heart of all of it, you have to go back almost 600 years to a king and a problem. For most of Korean history, Koreans wrote in Chinese characters, thousands of them borrowed from a neighbor, ill-fitting for the Korean tongue, and so difficult to learn that reading and writing belonged only to the wealthy. An ordinary Korean could speak the language perfectly and still have no way to write a single word of it. Knowledge was locked, and the lock was the writing system itself. In the 1400s, the fourth king of the Joseon dynasty decided to break that lock. His name was Sejong, and he is the closest thing this country has to a secular saint. He gathered his scholars, and together, possibly in secret because the elite did not want literacy spread to commoners, they did something almost no one in history has done. They invented an alphabet from nothing. They did not borrow it, they designed it. The result, finished around 1443 and proclaimed 3 years later, was called the proper sounds for the instruction of the people, what the world now calls Hangul. It had 24 letters. The shapes of the consonants were drawn to mirror the shape your mouth makes when you say them. It was so logical, so cleanly built, that a commoner could learn to read in a matter of days. Sejong said he had made it out of pity for the people who had thoughts they could not write down. The nobles fought it. They called it vulgar, a threat to learning beneath a serious person. For centuries, Hangul was looked down on, the writing of women and children and the poor, while the educated clung to their Chinese characters. The alphabet, that would one day carry the country to the world, spent most of its life dismissed in its own country. And then came the occupation, and the language itself was put on trial. By the 1940s, the colonial government had moved from discouraging Korean to trying to finish it off. Korean was banned in schools. Korean publications were shut down. The goal was a generation that would grow up unable to read its own tongue. But a small group of scholars, the Korean Language Society, had been quietly working for years on something the occupation could not allow to exist: a complete dictionary of the Korean language. Every word defined, ordered, preserved. If the language could be written down in full, it could not be allowed to die. It is 1942. The colonial police come for them. Dozens of the scholars are arrested, charged with the crime of working on the dictionary, charged in effect with the crime of the Korean language. They are tortured. One of them, a man named Lee Yun-jae, who had given much of his life to gathering and ordering the words, dies in prison the following year. The manuscript they had built, years of work, the words of a nation, disappears into the machinery of the colonial state. It is gone. And then the war ends. In 1945, Japan surrenders, and the occupation is over, and the scholars who survived come out of prison to a country that is free and broke and broken. And the dictionary is still lost. Until a few weeks later. It is the autumn of 1945. In a warehouse at Seoul Station, the central railway station of the capital, a worker comes across a stack of boxes that no one has claimed. Inside is a manuscript, thousands of pages. It is the lost dictionary. The colonial police had seized it as evidence and shipped it, and there it had sat, in a freight warehouse, through the end of the war, waiting in the dark, in the one building that connected the whole country. The scholars finished it. The Korean language was written down, in full, in its own alphabet, and it was never going to be lost again. Now, stand back and look at what you are holding. The alphabet a king invented out of pity in the 1400s. The dictionary a handful of scholars died to protect in the 1940s. A language that was dismissed by its own elite, then banned by an occupier, then nearly lost in a train station, saved. And that language, that exact alphabet, is the thing the world is now learning. When a teenager in Brazil or Nigeria or France writes out the words to a Korean song, they are writing in Hangul, the proper sounds for the instruction of the people. When the films and the shows and the music travel, they travel in the language that was banned in 1940. The subtitles the whole world now reads exist because the dictionary was found behind a railway station. The country did not conquer culture with something new. It conquered with the oldest, most stubborn thing it had, the one possession that survived every attempt to take it. That is why, alone among the nations of the earth, This country sets aside a day each October to celebrate not a battle, not a king, not an independence, but a writing system. Hangul Day, a national holiday for an alphabet. To an outsider, it can sound almost quaint. To a Korean, it is the most natural thing in the world, because the alphabet is the country. It was there before the land was lost, and it was still there after the land came back in half. When you have learned that your borders can be moved and your name can be struck from a register, you build your monument out of the one thing no one was ever able to reach, the way your people set down their own words. This is what the rest of the world keeps misreading. It looks at the music videos and the streaming charts and the beauty brands, and it thinks the wave is new, a clever modern industry built last decade. It is not. The wave is the visible edge of a 600-year refusal. A country that lost its land poured itself into the things land cannot hold. Words, songs, stories, the shapes of letters, because those were the things no army could confiscate and no government could legislate away. The empire it built is made entirely of the things you cannot occupy. An empire of land can be invaded. It can be partitioned, renamed, paved over, lost. This one cannot. You cannot occupy a melody. You cannot annex an alphabet. You cannot draw a border through a story once it has been told in 100 countries at once. The nation that lost its land did not give up on empire. It built one out of the only material no one would ever be able to take back, and then it sent that empire out, quietly, into nearly every home on earth that owns a screen. And here is where the story refuses to end neatly.
Because the country that won all of this
May be quietly losing something else. South Korea today has the lowest birth rate in the world. In 2023, it fell to 0.72 children per woman, less than half of what a population needs simply to replace itself. It rose barely to 0.75 the following year, the first rise in nearly a decade, and the government has thrown enormous sums at the problem. But the arithmetic is brutal. On its current path, the population could fall by half within a few generations. A country that fought through colonization and war and dictatorship to survive now faces a slower kind of disappearance, not from any enemy, but from its own falling numbers. No one fully agrees on why. The hours are long and the work relentless. The same drive that built the miracle now leaves little room for anything else. Housing in Seoul is among the most expensive in the world. The cost of raising a child in a country that treats education almost as a kind of war is staggering. And a generation that watched its parents sacrifice everything for the nation is, quietly, declining to make the same trade. The country asked for everything once and got it. It is learning that it cannot ask again. And the land is still cut in two. The cranes still winter in the DMZ. The families split in 1953 are nearly all gone now, the last of them dying without crossing back. The border that was meant to be temporary is older than almost everyone alive on either side of it. So the country stands in a strange place. It has more cultural power than at any point in its history, and a deeper uncertainty about its own future than at almost any point since the war. It conquered the attention of the whole world, and it cannot yet persuade its own people to carry it forward. There is one small thing worth ending on, though, because the country has a long habit of bringing back what it lost. In the southern mountains around Jirisan, there used to be bears, the Asiatic black bear, the moon bear, named for the pale crescent on its chest. Hunting and the loss of the forests drove them out, until the southern mountains fell silent of them. And then, beginning in 2004, conservationists started bringing them back, releasing young bears into the protected ranges, tracking them, protecting the dens. Slowly, the population is climbing. There are bears in the southern mountains again, born wild, raising cubs in a forest that had lost them. It is not a promise. The bears do not settle the birth rate or heal the border. But it is the country doing the thing it has always done, going back for what was taken and refusing to accept that gone means gone. The first cubs born wild in those mountains in a generation will never know their kind was once gone from them. They will simply be bears in a forest doing what bears do. That is what recovery looks like when it works. Not a monument, an ordinary life resumed. Perhaps that is the truest thing you can say about this peninsula. It has been invaded and divided and emptied and renamed. It has lost its kings, its land, its names, very nearly its language. And every time, it has gone back into the wreckage and pulled out the one thing that could not be destroyed, and built the next version of itself out of that. The world thinks it is watching a country that suddenly became fascinating. It is watching a country that has simply, finally, been heard. In an alphabet, a king made for the poor. In a language a few people died to save, carried now to every corner of an earth that took a very long time to listen. Thank you for watching. Until the next journey, take a breath and stay a while.